was in 2008 that an inconspicuous little book was published, and it really took the world by storm. The little book was called The Love Dare. Anybody heard of this book, Love Dare? It's actually based on a movie called Fireproof about a struggling husband trying to save his dying marriage. And his dad gives him this handwritten book that is called The Love Dare. It's just written out. And what the dad did is he gave the son 40 pages, 40 days, and each one had an assignment on it where the son had to do something selflessly loving, just something selflessly loving that day for his wife, trying to rescue his marriage. And of course, in the movie, it all works out in the end, and this marriage is rescued and things are changed. But what nobody could have predicted was that this little book that was then published not only sold a few hundred or a few thousands, but literally millions upon millions of copies of this book. It became like a revolution or a crazy thing around the world. And in fact, stories started to come in, 10, 20, 50, 100, of both husbands and wives who were struggling in their marriage or who just really wanted to do something for their marriage, who got this book and worked the book, and literally thousands, maybe even millions of marriages were saved and strengthened simply because somebody took the love dare. Somebody said, I will, once a day for 40 days, do something selflessly loving for the sake of somebody else. Now, part of me kind of chuckles when I hear that, because I kind of think, isn't that what we're supposed to do anyway? Like, isn't that sort of how relationships work, marriage or not? I mean, any relationship. And yet, if we're honest with ourselves, the truth is, as much as we'd like to think we operate that way, as much as we'd like to think we do those kind of things and live that way, the truth is, when we get closer examinations, most of our relationships would be revolutionized if we actually did this stuff. I mean, it's kind of a sad truth, kind of a hard truth, but it's true nonetheless. And the truth is that that's not only true in our marriages, that's true in our families, it's true in our friendships, it's true in our workplaces, it's true just with our enemies, it's true all over the place, that if we would simply, regularly, maybe every day, say, what can I do at work today? What can I do in this environment or that environment or in my neighborhood today that would be something that is a selfless act of love, that it would indeed revolutionize our relationships and really our world. And I think the more I reflect on it, I think all of life is kind of like one big love dare from God. I think God created you not because he was lonely and like needed you, because he was kind of like, oh, I just don't have any love and I just need some love. I think the biblical model is of a God who existed as Trinity in community with so much love and so much joy that he was abounding in this love and was looking for someone to pour that love on. And that God created you so that you could embrace and experience this incredible love, but then he created you so that you could actually become like him in his love. And really, when you think about it, there are love dares all the way through the Bible. This is one of the things that God challenges people to. He says it's actually the most important thing. And Jesus himself, when he walked this earth, God walking on earth, Jesus' teachings, and I've been sharing this with you through this whole series, his teachings, his actions, and his death on the cross were all expressions of this supernatural, crazy kind of, God kind of love that is so different than the kind of selfish love that we experience in this world, that every time Jesus taught it, it would make people kind of tilt. That every time Jesus acted on it, it would make people go, what? What did he just do? And then, of course, when Jesus finally died on the cross, it revolutionized. Jesus could have been voted, man, least likely to change the world. You know, no title, no position, didn't write a book, all of these different factors. And yet, more than any other person in history, Jesus has changed the world, really in 3 short years of ministry. How did he do it? He took God's love dare. He lived it. And then when it revolutionized the lives of those who were closest to them, he said to them, okay, now, by the power of my Spirit, I'm going to enable you to go do this very same thing. Love people like they've never been loved before. And as God's people began to do that, that's what characterized the early church. That they began to love people and selflessly and serve people. And life after life after life was changed. And then they were challenged with the same thing. And it changed our world as we know it today. And I kind of think the very same thing is meant to happen still. Don't you? That God still wants to revolutionize the world. That God still wants to change our lives and then the lives of those around us by taking on this very same love dare. 1 John chapter 4, verse 8 says, God is love. It's the very nature, it's the very essence of who God is. In fact, when Moses said to God, God, show me your glory. I just want to see you. And then God said, okay, I'll let it pass before you. When God's glory passed before Moses, you know what the words that came out were? The Lord who is loving and kind. The Lord who is compassionate. The Lord whose love lasts 1,000 generations, whose anger lasts just for a moment. It was God's love that revealed His nature, that revealed His glory, His goodness, that revealed His glory. But Ephesians chapter 5 takes that whole step further, and this is just one of so many verses like this, but it says this, imitate God. Isn't that a crazy verse? You ever just think about those words like that? Sometimes we need to read verses and just stop. Go, what did he just say? Imitate God? Nobody else thinks that's funny. I think that's crazy. How do you imitate God? How do you take God, the God of the universe, the God who made everything, and then there's little me? Imitate God. What? How? In everything you do, imitate God. Because you are His dear children, or His beloved children. How? Live a life filled with love. When in everything you do, you live a life filled with love, you're imitating God. You're acting like God. You are never more like God than when you are loving, when you're loving. And he says, following the example of Christ, and the verse goes on to say, who gave His life on our behalf, died for us. But maybe the best love dare in all the Bible is in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And we're going to actually take some time together today to walk through this whole chapter of the Bible. It might be the best place where we're dared to act out the love of God in our lives. And so if you have your Bibles, you can open them or you can turn them on and scroll down to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And we'll work our way through this. But just, I need to kind of lay a foundation for you from this series and then the context of this passage. In this series, we've said, hey, listen, if you're going to really engage this revolution that Jesus started, this kingdom revolution that turned the world upside down, you're going to have it happen to you first before it's ever going to happen through you. Before God can ever really supernaturally revolutionize the world through you, He has to supernaturally revolutionize you. And so for you to spread the love of God, you need to receive the love of God. You need to have your heart melted and changed powerfully by the love of God. And so we talked about that 2 weeks ago, and then we talked a little bit further about it last week and went to another level with it, saying it's this crazy, unconditional kind of love. But one of the questions we have to ask as we talk about subjects like this is, okay, God, transform my heart, change me so that I walk this revolutionary love. But what exactly does that look like? How does that, what does that do for me? What does that change in my day-to-day behaviors, in my day-to-day activities with those around me? What's it look like to live the love revolution? And I think this passage, about as well as any, describes it. This is the Apostle Paul. He's talking to the Corinthian church, and they're a pretty messed up church. I mean, they got a lot of things wrong with them. They got a lot of things not really going the way they should in their church. And they're the early church, so they're revolutionizing the world, and cool things are happening. But they got a lot of things to work on. Some unity issues, some behavioral issues, this issue, that issue. So Paul's addressing those and saying, here's what God says about that. Here's what God says about that. You can do better, and he's encouraging them and challenging them and so on. And the Corinthian church, one of their characteristics was they loved God working in powerful ways. They loved God using them. They loved these things called the gifts of the Spirit, where God could work through somebody and do something cool in somebody else's life. And they had asked the Apostle Paul about that. They'd said, how should this work? And we're having some problems with this. And what do you do? And so at the beginning of chapter 12, he says, hey, in answer to your questions, I want to give you some instruction about those cool supernatural things that God does through people. I want to tell you how to do that stuff. And so he talks to them about it. He says, look, it's not about putting on a big show. It's not about being super cool and being super awesome. It's simply about the body of Christ coming together and everybody just saying, I'm a servant. I'm just here to serve. I'm just here to serve. I'm just here to serve. So he says, stop thinking about it like a hierarchy. Stop thinking about who's better and who's cooler and whose gift you want and what you want, all that stuff. He says, no, just think of yourself as a servant. And just go around to every person you know and just say, here's my gifts. Here's what God could use me to do. And I lay that at your feet. And of course, just like us, the Corinthians, struggled with that because it's nice to kind of go, you ought to use my gift. And you ought to recognize my gift. And I'm awesome like that, right? And that person didn't receive my gift. And we can get mad at each other and, play all these games. And Paul just goes, no, take a different attitude. Take a different approach. Take a humble approach towards one another. And just come around each other and serve each other. And just be a body and complete each other. And let everybody do their part. And don't create hierarchies and think one part's better than the other part and do all of those games. So they're good with that, right? They're learning that, and they're getting a hold of that, and that's great. But then Paul says, he finishes some of his instruction on that, and then he says this line at the end of that instruction. He says, and now I will show you the most excellent way. And now I'm going to show you the most excellent way, or now I'm going to show you the way of life that's better than that. And what he's really saying is he's saying, it's cool for God to use you. It's cool to see supernatural things take place. It's cool to see awesome things happen in people's lives and happen through you, and it's exciting, and you're gifted, and yay, and you matter, and all of that stuff. But he says, you know what? All of that stuff, it has to have one thing as its foundation. It has to have one thing underneath it all. It has to have one thing that provides the richness that flows through the rest of it, or else all of it is nothing. But he's even saying more than that. He's saying there's a way of life. There's a whole way of life that will turn your life into a crazy adventure, that will cause you to come alive, that will cause you to see life differently. And we kind of know this intuitively, don't we? When you love somebody extravagantly, when you love somebody with God's kind of love, when you serve somebody with that crazy kind of love, what happens? You come alive. It's painful. It's hard. As you're thinking about it, you're like, no. But when you start stepping into that way of life, I was just reading this week a book by a guy named Bob Goff. He's a lawyer in California. I don't know. But you know the name of the book? The name of the book is Love Does. It'll be a book club here sometime for sure. And it's this guy, he's a lawyer in California, he's a straight-laced lawyer, but the guy wants to love. And so he does all of these crazy, extravagant things all around the world, just trying to express the love of God. Whether it's the person at the corner store, or whether it's in his law firm, or whether it's in ways that he finds to serve people, or whether it's just with his family, or whatever it is. But he just tries to live out, and then he writes stories about it. Ways that God's extravagant love have been lived towards him, and then experiences in his own life. And as you read it, you just start to think, man, I want to live that way. I want to live this adventure. I want to live a full life. And that's what Paul's trying to describe to these guys. So I'm going to give you 3 things that come from this chapter. The first thing is this: value love above everything else. That's what he's trying to say in these first few verses. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. A resounding gong or a clanging cymbal, you're an irritation. That's what he's saying, right? And what's interesting is he says, whenever you're trying to describe something as supremely awesome, you don't want to compare it with lousy things, because then you're just saying it's good. You want to compare it with really, really good things, because then you're showing that it's even more awesome than those really, really good things. Jim Collins, business writer from Good to Great, he says, the enemy of great is good. It's not bad, it's good. Because it's our busyness with all the good things of life that causes us to miss out on the best things, the great things. And so Paul says, hey, listen, if you're just chasing being able to speak with the tongues of men and angels, being able to be awesome at speaking and awesome at communicating, and you could just be really cool like that, right? And we kind of, in culture, we kind of exalt that and think that's pretty amazing. In fact, it's one of the number one fears, right, is public speaking, because we want to look good, and we want to be important, and we want to matter, and so on. And man, and so he just goes, you know what, that'd be good. That's not a bad thing. That's a really good thing. But if you don't have love with it, just a banging gong, just a clanging cymbal. Or even if you spoke in tongues of angels, even if you could speak a heavenly language, whoa. If there's not love that's at the root of it. In fact, in this day, banging, clashing cymbals and banging gongs, those were actually primarily used in the temples of idol worship in this day. And they would smash these cymbals and these gongs over and over again. And the idea was they kind of try to wake up the gods, right? Kind of get the gods active and get the gods working. And not only that, it worked really good for the people because it kind of shook them up and woke them up. And sometimes the ante. He says, not only if you're a good speaker or if you can speak in tongues of angels, he says, let me give it even bigger to you. The gift of prophecy, which he is going to tell us in the next chapter is like the best one of all, being able to speak to somebody else what God would say to them to encourage them or help them or strengthen them or challenge them. Wouldn't that be awesome? And he says that is awesome. That's a great thing. He says, even if I had that ability and I could nail it every time, then he says, even if I had all knowledge, all the knowledge in the world. And by the way, the Bible esteems knowledge. The Bible thinks knowledge is a good thing. It says people perish for a lack of knowledge. It says a wise person stores up piles and piles of knowledge. So it's good to have knowledge. He says, man, but even if you had all the knowledge in the world, you know, I grew up in a home where my dad, he pretty much has all the knowledge in the world. He's actually the smartest person I've ever met in my life. Someday I'd love to have him come and share some of his story with our church and his testimony. But he's the smartest guy I've ever met. I mean, way smartest guy I've ever met. In fact, you know, your dad might be able to beat up my dad, but my dad's smarter than your dad. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's the home I grew up in. And I could ask my dad anything, and his brains were just incredible, and everybody knew it, and it was cool and an amazing thing. But you know what the truth is? I love my dad. I respect my dad. I'm blown away by my dad, and it's not by his brains. In fact, imagine this. If my dad never loved me, how much would it matter to me how smart he was? How big of a deal would it be that he's the smartest guy on the planet? Right? I mean, it's nothing. It means nothing without love as its foundation. And then I love what he says there. If I have the faith that can move mountains. So now he's going spiritual on us. He's saying, even if you're the most spiritual guy in the world and you can pray things and see them answered and you can believe things and God's doing cool things through you, even that isn't the main thing. Even that you could do without a heart of love being behind it. You ever meet people with a gift of faith? Man, I've met people like that. They just believe God. They just trust God. They pray stuff and then God does it, and then they pray more stuff and God does it. Every time you see them, they have like 5 more stories for you. You ever meet people like that? It's pretty cool. Mostly. Kind of makes me jealous, actually. Kind of have to work on that probably. It's like probably it's going to come up here. But yeah, you meet people and that's cool. But God just says, you know what? As awesome as that is, it's got to flow from love. And then verse 3, he just pulls it all out. Even if I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. And so ultimately, that's what we think, isn't it? Okay. You want me to really live loving? You want me to go to the furthest extreme of love? I'll just sell everything I have. I'll just lay my life down and just crawl like a worm, you know, and just do everything to sacrifice. Certainly that would be love. And Paul goes, even if you did that, you could do it with the wrong motives. You could do it to gain for yourself. You could do it with all this other stuff. And in fact, sometimes we misunderstand love, don't we? So sometimes we think that love is just about pouring out stuff on other people or about sort of making our lives miserable. And there's some that's going to come to that, and we're going to see that in a minute. But do you know the truth is, oftentimes the most loving thing to do is not to give somebody something. Oftentimes the most loving thing to do is to do the opposite of that sometimes, the hard thing, a difficult thing, to allow somebody to experience their own pain, right? If the mistakes that they make, and then they have to, kind of pay the price for those things or whatever. And sometimes the most loving thing to do is to let them go through that so that they can grow and so on. Anyhow, Paul is trying to say here in all of this, value love above everything else. Love is more important than spiritual gifts, than knowledge and faith and generosity and accomplishments. Love's more important than anything in the whole world. So if you're going to walk the love walk, if you're going to live the love dare, if you're going to go out from here and in every relationship love people the God kind of love, you're going to have to say, you know what, more than anything in the world that I want this thing called love. It's the supreme thing. And it's got to be that way or I'll miss it. Okay, the second thing that we're going to see is that we need to practice loving every chance we get. So what do I actually do? What do I actually do when I'm supposed to love somebody else? And what I love about this passage is Paul gives us 15 things. 15 things that you actually do. It's almost like, how sometimes we're like, well, what do I do? Who is my neighbor or this or that? So Paul just goes, oh, you want to know? Okay, let me list it for you. Here's some things you can do. So the first one is love is patient. Love is patient. That simple. You want to love somebody today? You want to love right now in this very moment? You can love by being patient. Patient with the people next to you. Right? Patient with the preacher standing in front of you. So we're going to go way over time today? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just going to help you be loving by doing it. No. And you're like, what? Well, that sounds too simple. Yeah, try it. Right? Try it. Try it right now. Try it when you leave this place. Try it at lunchtime. And try it when you get home. And then try it at work tomorrow. And just see what it's like. Because walking in love means, literally, be patient with this person, with that person, with this situation when it's frustrating you and this person is frustrating you and it's hard. You just be patient. Okay, that's number one. Now, number two, love is kind. Well, there's another thing you could do. Imagine that. So you could be kind. Kind to the person in front of you and behind you, kind to the person beside you, kind to your pastor. I love that part. Right? You can be kind. You can, and just whatever you can think of, do something kind. Behave in some way kind. Say something kind. And in so doing, you're living the love of God. That's what love looks like. It's patient. It's kind. That's what it looks like. Here's the next one. It does not envy. And by the way, I'm going to go through these quicker as we go, okay? But it does not envy. And we have to pause there for a second because it's a not. And in this list of things that describe love, there's 15 of them. 8 of them are negative. Why is there so many negatives when it comes to this great expression called love? Because a huge part of what it looks like to be loving on a daily basis is to suppress selfishness. It's actually not doing a whole bunch of things. Living in love for a huge part on a daily basis towards our spouse, towards our friend, towards this person or that person, towards our coworkers, towards our schoolmates, all of these things, walking in love for a huge degree is just simply going, no, not going to do that. No. What we call sometimes our natural desires, right? We're going to put those aside, deny ourselves. So here it just says, it does not envy. In other words, it doesn't go, oh, I wish I had. Oh, I want, right? And then the very next line is quite interesting. It does not boast. So in envy, you have something I don't have. I want that. In boasting, I have something you don't have. I'm better. I'm on top. And do you know what's wrong with both of those? It's about me. It's about me. I'm making much of me. I'm envying or I'm boasting, but in either place, it's about me, which is why the very next line says, it is not proud. It's not about me. In fact, humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. You're just not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about the other. That's what love looks like. So it doesn't envy. It doesn't boast. It's not proud. It does not dishonor others. You want to walk in love this week? Don't dishonor people. Just choose. Just choose right now. Whoever you relate to, you're going to relate to them as if they were created in the image of God. Don't dishonor them. It's not self-seeking. I'm not going to seek my stuff with this. I'm not going to approach each relationship thinking, what can you do for me? But the other way. It's not easily angered. Isn't that a great one? How many of you in here sometimes struggle with being easily angered? Good. Thank you for confessing. That's awesome. I have nothing else for you. I just was curious. I'm just bugging. Just seeing if I can make you mad. No. Yeah, not easily angered. So things frustrate us. People frustrate us. In fact, I'll tell you what. A lot of love is dealing with the darkness in myself and dealing with the darkness in others. See that? A lot of what love is those two things. Okay, so it keeps no record of wrongs. That's a great one. Keeps no record of wrongs. You know what that means? When people wrong us, and they will, lots, in various ways, all kinds of people. In fact, every person in your life will wrong you lots. So when people wrong us, you just make a decision ahead of time. I will never hold that in my heart. I will never bear that as a grudge. I will never allow bitterness or resentment to stay in me. I will make sure that I let those things go. Now, there's kind of a mistake that we make in our culture in particular around this. I think every culture does this, but I think we're especially good at it. And when we say keep no record of wrongs, we kind of think that means just forgive and forget. Just forgive and forget. And so what we can do is we can take things that have wronged us, and we can sort of say to people who've wronged us, well, I'm keeping no record of that wrong, so you just go ahead and do it again, essentially, almost. So let me just give you an example of this. Let's say I leave my wallet out, and you steal $100 from it, okay? Should be hard to do, but anyway, let's just say that was possible, okay? You steal $100 from it. And the next day, I'm around you, and what am I going to do? Well, if I walk in love, I keep no record of wrongs. So I should just leave my wallet out again for you to steal another $100, right? And you could come up to me, and I'll tell you what, people do this with their dysfunctions all the time. And you could come up to me and say, well, aren't you loving? Why don't you love me? You should just leave your wallet out again. Now, what should we say at that moment? The most loving thing I can do for you in this moment. It's not about my $100. The most loving thing I could do for you in this moment is not to put you in the very same place of temptation, but in fact to help you bear the consequences of your actions so that you can learn and grow from it. Does that make sense? So keeping no record of wrongs is not about just letting people walk all over us and abuse us and use their dysfunction as or use this idea as an excuse for their dysfunction. Is that fair? But learning to keep no record of wrongs is about your heart. It's about not allowing a grudge or a bitterness to build up in your heart. Fair enough? Are we all good on that? Just you kind of got that. Okay. So, does not delight in, keeps no record of wrongs. Verse 6, it does not delight in evil. I don't want wrong for anybody else. I don't want hurt for anybody else. But rejoices with the truth. Let's let what's true come to light. And then verse 7, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. What I think is happening at this point in this passage is Paul's describing this. Be patient, be kind, don't be envious, don't boast, don't be proud, don't dishonor people, walk respectfully with people, be courteous, all these things. He's giving you all these instructions. You could do this, do this, do this, do this. This is what love looks like every day, every moment. You can do it. Go for it. But it's almost like it's piling up. It's getting bigger and bigger, and we're like, yeah, I could do that. Yeah, I could do it. Ooh, that's hard. Yeah, okay. And then he finally goes, you know what love does? It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. It never fails. It's almost like he gets to the end of it, and he just goes, you know what? The kind of love I'm describing for you here, it's a supernatural thing. It's a God kind of thing. It's a love that you really could never possibly... You see, up until this verse, you can kind of say, well, I'm patient sometimes. Well, I try to be kind as best I can. Right? Well, I don't envy too much or boast too much. I'm working on that. I certainly don't keep a record of wrongs with this person and this person and this person. That person, well, maybe a little bit. Right? And you can kind of work your way through it like that. But once you get to this verse, Always, 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 4 always in a row? You just go, okay. I can't do this. I need God. I need God's power and God's ability and God's capacity if I'm ever possibly going to do this. It makes it plain that love is no human quality, not the kind of love being talked about here. It's a gift of God Himself. And that takes us to the last thing, and that is grow in love every day of your life. It says, love never fails. Where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what's in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection in a mirror, but then we shall see face to face. Now we know in part, but then we shall know fully, even as we are fully known. So where's he going with this? He's going back to the very beginning of the chapter, where he said, love is more important than all of these things. Prophecy, speaking in tongues, speaking this way and that way, faith, this and that. Saying love is bigger than all those things, so love never fails. It's at the bottom of them all. And then he says, all this stuff, even good stuff, it's going to fade. It's going to fade. But there's something that will last forever. He's trying to get our eyes off the temporary and onto the eternal. He says, look, when you look around our world, there's so much we don't understand. There's so much we don't grasp. And one day we're going to grasp it. But until that day, there is something you can hang on to. There's something that can be the foundation of everything else. There's something that is eternal. And actually, this echoes what many passages of the Bible invite us to do. Not just look at the temporary of life, but to live our lives in light of eternity. That's the invitation of God. Live at a higher level. Live at a different level. And so he says, these 3 remain. Faith, hope, and love. These are all eternal qualities. These are all bigger than just circumstances or just the here and now, this moment. And then he says, and the greatest of these. If you had to put one at the bottom, if you had to put one that was the rock-solid foundation that would carry you through everything else, it's love. It's love. And actually, the very next line, chapter 14, verse 1, says, follow the way of that love. Follow the way of that love. Here's what I think Paul is trying to do here. And let me show it to you this way, just with these verses. This is the end of chapter 12, just before the love chapter, chapter 13. This little line, I shared it with you already, and now I will show you the most excellent way, or another translation, let me show you a way of life that's best of all, or the message, but now I want to lay out a far better way for you. So Paul's saying there's a better way, there's a better way, there's a better way. Then he describes that better way, this supernatural love of God. And then look how he closes this passage, sandwiches this love chapter. So follow the way of love, or pursue love, or let love be your highest goal. Or I love the way the Amplified puts it. Eagerly pursue and seek to acquire this love, to make it your aim, make it your greatest quest. In other words, if there's anything you're going to make your life about, if there's anything you're going to try to grow in or get better at or become, then let this be the one thing that you're going to pursue, that you're going to develop, that you're going to work on, that you're going to build into you. You're right, you don't have it. When you list out all that love, hey, man, none of us make it to God's standard. But by the power of God's Spirit, God invites every one of us, in fact, He dares every one of us to live a life of love, to grow in that love day by day by day. I heard a story recently of a Christian who was talking to an agnostic. It's a guy who doesn't really believe in God and so on, and he was quite bold about his position, and he said to this Christian, he said, well, you know what? Most of the people I meet, they're not that loving. Even Christians, I meet Christians, they're not that loving. I have a neighbor, he gets up, he goes to church every single Sunday, and I don't think he's any more loving than me. And this Christian looked back at him and he said, okay. He said, let me just ask you a few questions. Tell me about your family growing up. Were they loving? And he says, oh man, they were awesome. They loved me. They were an amazing family. They raised me well. They loved me well. And he says, that's good. It's good. Tell me about your extended family. Were they kind of, that kind of extended family? Or were they like, he's like, no, they were great too. I really appreciated them. They really were awesome. He says, wow, that's awesome for you. Happy for you. Says, tell me about your workplace. How's your workplace? Is it kind of a toxic, difficult environment, or is it a pretty good environment to work in? He goes, oh, man, you wouldn't believe we have so much fun. We're like a team. I feel like our workplace is like a big family. I just love it. It's great. I say, wow, that's great for you. So he says, let's just look at this for a second. If this is the line of love, you had a nice family. You had a nice extended family. You have a nice workplace. You've been pretty well set in this area of your life. Now, we don't know your neighbor, but just for the sake of discussion, let's just say that your neighbor grew up in a real broken, messed up type family. One where there wasn't a whole lot of love. One where there was some rejection, maybe some abuse. Maybe some words spoken that just pummeled him down. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that wasn't just his immediate family, but let's say that maybe his extended family was also dysfunctional and didn't help at all. There was no uncle or aunt who could come alongside and kind of help with that. And let's say, for the sake of argument, maybe his teachers and his coaches and whoever in his life didn't believe in him, didn't see anything in him, maybe because of some of those other experiences in his life, and just kept pushing him down. Let's say that he works at a job where there's a pretty toxic environment, where people are competing and pushing each other down. He says, no, let's say that. If we took that line again, you got these things, he probably started somewhere down here. He said, and then he encountered the love of God. And God's love has been working on him and changing him. And you just told me you don't think he's any more loving than you are. That means you're about at the same level. And then he just asked him this question: who's made more progress on the love journey? Who's made more progress on the love journey? You see, it's not about us getting to perfection. That's what Jesus does on our behalf. It's about us inviting God to make us a little more loving tomorrow and the next day and the next day than we are today. And I don't want to get too soft on you. This is a tough call. This is not a pain-free, easy kind of life. This is an invitation to die. But it's an invitation to the greatest kind of life you could ever possibly live. Jesus himself dared to go to the cross for us. Our Heavenly Father dared to send his one and only Son to die for us. And God is inviting us to continue his revolution that changed the world by inviting us to receive that love and then to spread that same love. It's a great love there. Let's stand together. We'll close in prayer.